It is now my pleasure to turn today's program over to Jay Bell, Regional VP of Key Accounts Group, NG Resources, and Travis Arndt, Director of Supply, NG Resources. Jay, you may begin.
Thank you. We're actually going to start off with a quick poll question, actually. So, Monique, if you would send out that poll question, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to have about 30 seconds, and just going to wait for everybody to weigh in on this particular question, and then we'll get started. Okay, perfect. All right, so the question is, are you currently using strategy in an attempt to lower your capacity charges? And it looks like well over 50% of the group on the phone are in fact using strategies to lower their peak demand, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. However, before we get into actually talking about various tactics to lower your peak demand charges, I want to spend some time, actually a good amount of time, talking about capacity itself. So what is capacity? How much of your total energy spend does capacity actually represent? How is it calculated? And really, it's really important to understand those components before you really spend any time understanding how to manage and lower your peak demands. So the first part of the presentation will be focused on that. The second part of the presentation will actually get into looking at various tactics of lowering your PLCs. We'll look at some of the values by market for each megawatt that you're able to reduce to give you a feel for the types of savings that are available. And also we'll talk about the importance of structuring your supply agreement to ensure that you're capturing all the value levers associated with any of the tactics that you're employing. And then finally, we'll look at some advanced strategies, including some of the capital projects on looking at how to revolutionize your coincident peak and reduce CO2 emissions. And really taking advantage of your load flexibility. So let's start off and talk a little bit about capacity and position capacity within the energy pyramid. So what you're seeing here is really a representative energy pyramid for the components that make up delivered cost of energy. So when you look at your bill, clearly usually the largest component of that bill is your underlying energy costs. However, there are three other components, capacity, ancillary services, and transmission costs. And more, again, this is meant to be representative, but more and more we're seeing the capacity costs become a higher percentage of your delivered cost of energy. The other thing I want to point out on this energy pyramid is you see those squiggly lines? Those are meant to represent the underlying volatility associated with each one of those components. Clearly, energy is by far the most volatile component, and for that reason, most customers spend the vast majority of their time focusing on how to lower their energy costs, which typically means trying to negotiate the lowest cost. However, capacity costs, when you look at that element, and again, with capacity costs continuing to increase in most of the Northeast markets, it's becoming a bigger percentage. The actual underlying volatility associated with capacity costs is fairly low. You'll see in a minute how we actually calculate capacity costs. You'll see that it's a very formulaic expression, and there's only a couple of elements that really impact those prices. So they're relatively stable. And then you have ancillary services costs and your transmission costs. So what is capacity? We talk about capacity often. This really sort of defines what capacity is. And by the way, I'm going to be doing most of the presentation today. Travis, he heads up our Northeast supply desk, and I'm going to use him as a subject matter expert. So if I say something, Travis, that is factually incorrect, you feel free to stop me and weigh in. But capacity costs really are meant to address local reliability issues. And so the way that the market is designed, it's set up to incent generation to be constructed and put into locations where you have the most constraints. And so it's a good way to incent that new generation to be properly located within the ISO's footprint. And it helps essentially establish reliability for our customers and have enough generation to meet demand. So let's talk about the capacity market and the RPM market. So by definition, each rep, each load-serving entity is charged for a daily unforced capacity obligation. It's priced at the applicable zonal capacity price for the delivery period that we're going to be selling to a customer. The purpose of that charge is it's collected from load, so from customers, and it's paid to generators to ensure that the ISO has sufficient generating capacity at any given point in time, and that new resources are optimally sited within the ISO's footprint. In terms of cost certainty, suppliers, we wear both capacity tag and usage risk in some product structures. It depends on a customer if they're asking a supplier to lock in capacity in their price or if they're looking to pass it through. And we're going to show you in a few minutes here how it's actually calculated and why it's important that you really focus on how you structure your supply side agreement. The interesting thing, and one of the things that we always focus on in discussions with customers, is the fact that capacity is charged to a retail supplier on an absolute basis. When a customer asks a supplier to fix capacity in their fixed price, then capacity is collected on a volumetric basis, which actually introduces uncertainty. So we'll have this, we'll get into this discussion again a little bit further when we talk about supply side agreements, but just think about that notion for a second, where customers oftentimes want a fixed price because they say they want price certainty, and yet when you ask a supplier to lock in capacity in the fixed price, you introduce volumetric uncertainty into that mechanism. And so it's just something that you need to consider when you think through how you want to structure your supply side agreement. And then finally, in terms of the customer cost, really depending on the term length and the start and end dates, and the planning years, zone and load factor, it's a cost that's easily forecasted for customers. So capacity cost calculations. I'm not going to go through each of these elements that calculate your capacity costs. These slides will be distributed after the webinar, so really for large intents, this is for reference material. But what is important to communicate on this slide is the fact that capacity is very much a formulaic expression. So any customer or any partner of a customer can go onto the ISO's website and pull down each one of the elements that will determine what a customer's capacity cost is. So in PJM, you can see the customer's PLC, you can see the zonal scaling factor, you can see the forecast pool requirements, you can see the RPM costs and the days in the billing cycle. You multiply all those together and you essentially come up with what the customer's absolute capacity cost is. Again, it's formulaic, it's very transparent, very easy to see, and so when you know what it is, it's easy to budget for it, which again gets back to the concept of do you really want to lock in capacity and introduce the volumetric uncertainty associated with capacity. Same thing with NYISO and NEPOOL. Again, you can see what each of the formulas are. You can go out to the ISO's website, get each one of those determinants, and very quickly see what your capacity costs are for the next planning period. So how are the PLCs actually set, and what are those planning years, and what the capacity costs are? So what I've lined out here is for each of the markets, PJM, NYISO, NEPOOL, and ERCOT. Even though ERCOT, Texas, is not a capacity market, it's an energy-only market, they do actually still have PLCs, and that's for their transmission-related costs. So you can see that in PJM, you have what people will refer to as the 5 CP, the 5 coincident peak. Those are the 5 highest hours occurring on summer weekdays from June to September for the entire PJM transmission. And so what they'll do is they'll take those 5 hours, they look at a snapshot, and then they'll add those together, deconstruct it, and that will set the customer's PLC for the next capability period. And you can see in PJM the capacity period is from June through May. And the capacity costs are based on the base residual auction. So prices for what people refer to as the BRA are known up to 3 years in advance of the effective planning year. You can see that NYISO, it's a 1 CP event or a 1 coincident peak. It's the single highest hour throughout the year. The NYISO planned capacity year, actually on here I have it as June through May, but it's actually May through April.
May through April, yeah, that's correct.
So we'll adjust these slides before we send them out to address that. And they have a similar sort of a base residual auction. It's based on capability periods, and they have 3 auction strips, and that's how you're able to calculate your forward capacity costs. NEPOOL is a 1 CP event, so it's the single highest hour. Their capacity planning period is June through May. And it's based on a forward capacity auction, the FCA, so prices are also known up to 3 years in advance of the effective planning year. And then in ERCOT, you have a 4 CP approach to establishing your PLCs. It's the highest hour that occurs in the month of June, July, August, and September. And again, those are averaged together, and that will set the customer's PLC for the next capability period, and the planning years in ERCOT are actually a January through December. And again, it doesn't affect capacity costs, but it does affect the customer's transmission costs. So there's still tremendous value in reducing your PLCs in ERCOT as well. Very busy slide, but the intent of this slide is essentially to show you capacity costs. This is specific to PJM, so I don't have this in here for the other markets. But what I wanted to do is at least demonstrate you can see how capacity costs have been increasing over time, and the projections are that capacity costs will continue to increase and become a higher and higher percentage of your delivered cost of energy. So we're going to stop here for a second, take another 30 seconds and do another poll question, and then we'll move on to the next section. Since we just covered this, I'm sure we'll get a 100% correct answer here. All right, see the results. Ooh, okay, so 85, not bad. I guess I need to work maybe on my my professor skills a little bit, but so it's actually 5 CP, and that's June through September. The 4 CP is actually for Texas. That's in ERCOT. They have a 4 CP event. So that's pretty good. And again, this is you'll have this as reference material to be able to go back and look at. And again, I apologize. We'll correct the capacity planning years for NYISO and NEPOOL and make those minor adjustments. All right, so let's move on then to the next section, which is understanding customer strategies to mitigate your peak demand or reduce your PLCs. So really, what again, when you look at the cost of capacity in the markets, there is a large financial driver to actively control your PLC contributions, and there's a number of ways you can do that. There are peak demand management services, which I'll show you in the next section. Any kind of demand side management through automatic controls where you can control various components within your building envelope. That gives you load flexibility. That can be used to lower your PLC contribution. Clearly, any type of energy efficiency project, whether that's lighting retrofits, window upgrades, building insulation, etc., any type of energy conservation measure that's done within that building envelope will have an impact on your PLCs. Solar installation or other types of on-site generation or storage technologies, those will have an impact on your PLCs as well. And this is why it becomes important. This is a representation of the four markets, and it represents what type of value would be associated with a reduction of 1 megawatt towards your PLC. So if you're a 3 megawatt customer, that's your peak load contribution for the current capability period, and you use any of these past measures, again, ECMs, on-site generation, etc., to lower your PLC by a megawatt, you can see in PJM, as an example, that a megawatt represents about $50,000 in savings. That's going to vary, obviously, by utility, but on average, it's about $50,000. In ERCOT, you're looking at $56,000 in transmission savings. In NEPOOL, capacity costs would drop by about $50,000, and in NYISO, it's upwards of $80,000. The interesting thing, though, is that you can see below on your utility demand management, which is your PLC that's used to calculate transmission costs, taking advantage of lowering your PLCs for capacity most likely will also have a fairly sizable impact on your transmission costs as well. And you can see in some cases in NYISO that could be upwards of $200,000 a year. So this clearly shows that customers that have the ability to focus on managing their PLCs can drive significant savings out of their cost equation. And it's interesting to me. I've been in this business for a long time on the deregulated side, and we'll get into negotiations with our customers and our customers' third-party intermediaries where we'll honestly be negotiating over a nickel or a dime on a retail contract that it represents on a 10,000 megawatt hour a year customer, we're talking about $500. $1,000 in savings on that nickel, whereas we have software and solutions that can help them drive hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings if we can help them focus on managing PLCs. So I won't go through, but there's also advantages in the ancillary services market, and then there's also energy arbitrage depending on the type of technology that you have installed and how sophisticated you want to get and how much time you want to spend in managing your energy. But again, you can see very clearly here that capacity costs are a big number, and you've got the ability to control that. So one of the things that's really important is if you are going to start managing your peak demand charges through PLC management technologies, then you're going to have to think through your supply side equation. So it's really important to understand how your energy contract handles capacity charges currently if you're looking at doing any type of energy conservation measure within your building envelope, or if you want to actively take advantage of PLC software, which I'll show you in a few minutes. It's going to be important to understand how your current capacity costs are structured within your underlying agreement, and then make sure as you start negotiating and looking at your next agreements how you want to handle capacity within it. If you fix capacity, you have to understand that there's forecasted volumes that are being used to determine your fixed price. And so again, that oftentimes becomes that in and of itself can change or can lead to differences in supplier pricing to the customer. So just to make an easy example, if you're forecasted to have $50,000 of capacity costs and you use 50,000 megawatt hours a year within your portfolio, that would equate to $1 per megawatt hour for capacity. If your supplier is weather normalizing your load, as an example, or they have a bad feed from the utility, and they're looking at your load being 40,000 megawatt hours a year, their fixed price is going to go up by I can't do that math fast, but a nickel, let's say, or 10 cents. So now they're going to be bidding their fixed price, and their capacity costs are actually higher on $1 per megawatt hour basis. Whereas if another supplier is estimating that you're going to use 60,000 megawatt hours a year, they can actually be giving you a quote that's significantly lower than the other supplier. because they're taking that $50,000 and they're amortizing it over more volume. So again, it introduces volumetric uncertainty. So for a customer that wants budget certainty, you probably actually want to look at just fixing capacity and taking it on a pass-through basis. The other thing that you need to know is how are the PLCs being used? If you're asking for a fixed price, are they using the current PLC for the full term of the structure of your transaction, or are they forecasting those PLCs? Also, you need to be cognizant of contractual language that allows for adjustments of the rate and the PLC based on their usage assumptions. And the other thing to note is you need to realize that a supplier will reap the benefit of any reduction in PLCs regardless of how you achieve them, whether it's through active management, energy efficiency, etc., if you fix capacity into your fixed price. So again, something that you need to think about as you're structuring your supply side agreements. So typically, for customers that do want to actively manage their PLCs, or have renewable projects that they're thinking about implementing, or energy conservation measures, typically what we say is go ahead and pass that through. We can help you with budgeting, so we understand that customers need budget certainty or would like budget certainty. So if it's going to be on a pass-through basis, we can budget it for you so that you can take that into account, but then actually take it on a pass-through basis and ensure that you're capturing all the value levers that come from all of the energy conservation measures or active energy management that you're doing. The rates, again, they're transparent for multiple years forward. There's no volumetric risk associated with under or over forecasting of load. You benefit from the decrease in PLCs year over year. Any PLC increases will be charged based on actual and not estimated values. And every customer, you have to manage your peak load contribution through tools and information, and that's what we're going to get into next year. But before we do that, since we've gone through that section, we're going to do another poll question and see how we do on this question. That was the last thing we just talked about, so hopefully we get 100% correct on this question. All right, so let's see what the results of this one are. Hopefully we got 100%. All right, I'm slipping. We went 79%. So, no, you do introduce volumetric risk when you lock capacity into your price. Again, it goes back to that example of if your capacity costs are $50,000 and you use 50,000 megawatt hours a year, it's supposed to be $1, but you can use more or less, and you're going to either underpay or overpay the supplier based on your actual usage. So again, if you want to eliminate volumetric risk, you pass through capacity. Okay, I know we're supposed to have 15 minutes of Q&A. I've got one last section I need to get through, and we're already at the 30-minute mark, so I'll try and speed this up a little bit. So this is an example of how in PJM your PLC is set. So again, just as a reminder, your PLC is a 5 coincident peak. It occurs between June and September. It's the 5 highest hours, and those hours are then averaged together, and that will set the customer's PLC for the next capability period. The reason I'm showing you this is that if you want to actively manage those hours, there are a number of tools out there, a number of suppliers and utilities that do actually have PLC notification software. Usually it's just an email that hits your inbox that says, hey, today is a potential high PLC day, and if you want to try and manage, you should try and lower your peak load contribution. That's fine. We've seen a number of those tools out there. The problem with it is that it usually doesn't give you much time to react to that news. The other thing is those algorithms, oftentimes, anytime it's over 80 degrees, they start sending out notifications. And so it becomes kind of a boy who cried wolf syndrome where people just start ignoring those notifications. They go, yeah, it's another high potential PLC day, and nobody takes any action. So this is a little bit of a pitch for NG Resources. We actually have partnered with a company that we provide this service to our customers. It's our PLC management software. It's available for all markets, so with NEPOOL, NISO, PJM, and ERCOT. And it is an algorithm that is very, very precise and very good at predicting when the peak load contribution hours are going to occur. But more importantly, it gives you a website where you can actively log in and see 1 week forward what each of the days look like, what the forecasted peak demand on the system load is going to be, and whether or not there's a high potential PLC day. And the reason this is important is that if you're a manufacturing facility or if you have load flexibility, if you're going to have an outage, you can look a week ahead and you can start making some changes to how you operate your facility, or make changes to, again, if you're a manufacturing facility, maybe you decide to take down a line to change out a line or do repairs and maintenance. Maybe you were planning to do that on Thursday or Friday of that week, but now you know that Monday is a very high potential peak day, and so you decide to make that change now and take that line down on Monday and avoid it. The other thing that it does is it will predict the hour with a 30-minute wrap on each side. So it's going to say today is a high potential PLC day. The hour is going to be hour ending at 5 o'clock. And so, you want to start taking down your load between 4:30 and 5, and then keep it off until 6:30. So you've got a 2-hour window now, which becomes much more actionable for a plant manager or an energy manager who's got building automation control capabilities to start managing that load reduction. Obviously, it's an email alert system as well, so you'll get the emails that can be sent out to any of your facility managers, office managers, whoever has access to the building automation controls, or if you've got a plan in place to reduce, if you've got your load flexibility that you use for a demand response program, as an example, you would use that exact same load flexibility during these PLC events that take place. The next thing then is managing capacity through creative solutions. And one of them that we're seeing more and more, and in fact we've made an investment in a company called Green Charge Networks, which is a battery storage technology company and algorithm company. Using on-site storage, you're able to, again, if you get this PLC notification, you could bring down your load during that 2-hour window by whatever your total storage capacity is in the battery that you have on site. So you can manage your peak demand with battery storage. You can also manage utility demand charges with the battery. There's also the ability to play in the regulation market depending on where the battery is in place. And there's also the economic market, so actually load shifting and energy arbitrage between fixed price obligations and the real-time market. So we're seeing more and more of this. Clearly, if you have questions about battery storage technologies, ask your NG sales director, and they'll be able to get the right people on the phone with you. We're seeing more and more installation of behind-the-meter solar PVs. Typically in the past, it's interesting. I've been sat with a number of customers that have not taken capacity and transmission reductions into account when they look at the economics associated with a PV installation. Typically, they just look at offsetting number of megawatt hours, avoided megawatt hours times an assumed energy rate. And that's how they run their calcs on the ROI for the project. However, you're also, the minute you turn on a solar PV, the likelihood that you're going to lower your PLC is very high, because usually those high peak hours are occurring when it's the hottest and it's sunny. That's usually when your array is going to be at full production. And so definitely, whatever the installed capacity of that solar array is, it's going to reduce your PLCs accordingly. And this just depicts what your an average facility's load profile looks like, overlaid with solar production, and you can see where the coincident peak range takes place. And so you can see that in some cases you could actually drop your PLCs by 40 to 60%. And in addition to that, depending on the market, you combine that with battery storage, and now you're really having an impact on PLCs and the economic value of installed PVs. So finally, this is the last slide. Just want to again reiterate that there's significant benefits in peak demand management. There's more and more technology out there that can help give customer insight into when those high PLC events are going to occur, so that you can leverage your load flexibility to lower your capacity costs. It definitely gives you awareness, provides awareness to our customers, giving them insight into their current energy usage and prices. It helps manage the system peak demand as well, so lowering annual peak contributions also lowers your monthly utility demand charges. Advanced energy planning for budgeting purposes, integration of distributed generation and storage. So if you're looking at doing integrated type projects, then you leverage the PLC notification software along with your on-site generation and storage. And frankly, energy conservation measures are really important to take into consideration, because obviously the lowest cost per kilowatt hour is the one that you don't use. So ECM should absolutely be considered as one of the key ways to lower your PLC. But again, it allows you to take a proactive step in managing your energy budget, and it's going to help revolutionize the grid as well. And that is the end of what I had to present. I ran about 5 minutes over, right? But
fine, yeah.
And so we got 10 minutes left for Q&A. I see there's actually I think a couple that have come in. I'm going to let Travis actually go through this first question that came in.
Yeah, so we got a few questions out there I want to answer. One of them, are there any conflicts between participating in the demand response and actively managing peak demand? Great question. Simple answer, no. Those two programs mutually exclusive. One ran by the ISO, one that you can manage through your retailer, such as NG. And actually managing, you can maybe potentially double up. The ISO tends to send out those signals when the peak hour arrives to kind of help mitigate and lower demand. So you could double up if you were to reduce your consumption and then additionally use a battery. You could even lower your peak load contribution even more so. Still receiving some. We got another one. What impact do you see the retirement of Indian Point having on capacity prices in New York? It's a good question. Somebody's very in tune with the market. As part of Governor Cuomo's reforming the energy vision, he is planning to retire Indian Point, which is a 2-gigawatt nuclear plant outside of New York City. The retirement is planned right now for Station 1 in 2020, with the other station to follow in 2021. As I said, it's about 2 gigawatt. There's 1.9 gigawatt that is coming online. So depending on timing, it should have no impact. That is the expectation. That there are also some extensions that are being filed, or extension requests rather, that are being filed to try to ensure that there's no impact to those that are in the lower Hudson Valley and New York City localities. Also had a question about the slide deck itself. Why does the energy pyramid illustration show 0% volatility for transmission when NITS has been a huge headache in PJM? PJM is not my expertise. I'm NEPOOL, New York. I do not have an answer to that, but I will speak with my colleagues on that PJM desk. I don't even have a good guess. So
I can just step in if you want. So you're right. NITS has been pretty volatile the last number of years. It has been doing nothing but, for the most part, increasing every 6 months. But it is you've got 6-month windows where you know what your NITS costs are. And so again, it's illustrative. If you think back to the lower part of the energy pyramid, the energy piece, that's really, that really is the most volatile, meaning even intraday, you can see changes in your energy price just based on what natural gas is doing. Granted, the volatility, if you went back 5-6 years before fracking and, when you had, dollar changes on forwards in the natural gas market, you saw tremendously more volatility associated with energy than you do today. But I think that's really the intent of that graphic. But it's a very good point on the fact that NITS has been increasing quite a bit over the last number of years.
Okay. Another question. NG contract does not list PLC. While important, how can a customer know when it materially changed if it's not provided in the contract? I will say that our contract, it is structure dependent on whether you choose to pass it through, or we have a particular structure that allows for you to lock in up to a certain known percentage or a known PLC, locking in so it protects you 100% against price movement, but only up to a certain percentage of your capacity tag. That one, because there is movement that could be a benefit to you, we want to make sure, or it could go against you if you do not lower your tag. We want to make sure you know what the baseline is. Why it's not inherent on all of our contracts, I don't have a good answer for that, but maybe Jay does. If not, just something historically we hadn't had.
Right. Well, so your PLC is known for the current capability period. So we know what if we're bidding on load that's starting before the next capability period, we know what your PLC is going to be. However, if you're doing a 2 or 3 year contract, we don't know what the PLC in the outer years are going to be. But the key is up front during the bidding process, when you're normalizing and trying to find out, what suppliers are using, we are absolutely able to. We have complete visibility into what PLCs that we're using for our customer, what our loss factors are that we're forecasting, or what they are that are in the system, what the volume forecasts are. Those are all elements that should be provided by your supplier to you, along with the price, so that you can really look at all your suppliers and what they're forecasting and ask those questions and make sure that you're normalizing for it.
Starting to continue to get a few in. See a question: how do residual capacity auctions impact the ability to forecast capacity costs? I will say for me, New York, it doesn't have the idea of a forward auction similar to NEPL or PJM. NEPL, however, does have the residual annual and monthly. It'll have a few annual and then the monthlies, and we get that information well into advance. Whenever you get into the monthlies, it's not much volatility there. It's just a little bit of delisting where maybe there's a certain retirement or a particular unit was reset on the amount of capacity it actually could claim. As you all know, it's not 100% of their nameplate. It's what they actually can show and demonstrate they can perform. So I think we have enough of information in advance to reliably forecast those costs.
We have another question that I'll address if you want. It's sure. Could the notification from DRP, a demand response program, and PLC be at the same time? And what could be the strategy in that case? So yeah, absolutely that they could coincide. They're mutually exclusive. So just because you're participating in a demand response program does not prevent you from trying to manage your PLCs. There is, again, a chance that during those system peaks, that may be a time when the ISO is calling for demand reduction. And so, quite frankly, if you're doing that, you're benefiting in both cases. You're generating revenue through your demand response program, and you're going to be benefiting from the fact that you're reducing your PLC, at least for that hour. If it's NISO and NEPL, then fantastic. If it's PJM, it's most likely one of the hours of the 5 hours. So it's a mutual benefit. So there's no conflict there.
Okay. Another question: what percentage let's say, NG fixed price customers have historically paid as a result of assuming an inherent volumetric risk? Have you any way of tracking those statistics? It's a really good question. At percentage, I think it really depends on the customer and how correlated they are to the system peak when it was priced. For instance, was this customer priced after the polar vortex, or 2013, 2014? 2013 was one of the hottest summers up in the Northeast, and then we had the polar vortex. There's a lot of volumetric and the weather sensitivity of the load as well. There could have been, if you had anybody costing you or pricing you late in 2014, they would have used potentially the historical usage, which would have shown higher than expected volumes future, and so probably would have underpaid with that volumetric risk. Now, however, coming off of 2015, 2016, where we've seen record lows as far as consumed usage, if there is some sort of event in the future where we have a heat wave, and again, you have to be weather sensitive, or maybe it has nothing to do with whether you add a third shift or you expand your operations where you're utilizing more consumption. I would say you're coming off in what potentially has been priced into your contractor lower volumes, and thus when you amortize that fixed over those lower volumes, in the case of the example that Jay had given earlier, 50,000 on 50,000. So in this case, you use the 40,000, which instead of $1 is $1.25 per megawatt hour. Then you're paying an extra quarter. Actually, for every megawatt hour you consume over that 40, you're paying $1.25 more than you really needed to, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to get people to bifurcate the two, whether it's pass-through or what we're trying to advocate as well is getting the whole market to change such that we fix it and we'll show it as $1 per megawatt or $1 per kilowatt hour so you can compare us to others. But when it comes to being billed, it's actually just the fixed charge every month bifurcated from your energy. So there's a couple of things that we're trying to do to help our customers out. But no, a really good question, and don't have a percentage. It's really tough, and it really depended on the type of load.
What it does highlight, actually, in my mind, if you go back to the energy pyramid and you think about each of those components, there's really only three ways that a retail supplier can manage their risk. The first one is hedging bilaterally with a wholesale counterparty for energy, and we can take that risk off the table through that hedge. The second way is through risk premiums, and the third way is through contract language. Right? I think everybody on the phone knows that every supplier has a change in law clause in their contract, so that if something completely unforeseen changes, in the market, you're always able to raise your hand and claim a change in law. Capacity is one of those elements where if a supplier or if a customer is asking a supplier to wear the risk associated with capacity beyond the current capability period, then that's where either risk premiums come in or contract language. And oftentimes customers miss the contract language where they're certain that their capacity costs are fixed, but somewhere in the contract there's the ability for the supplier to adjust the customer's rate because of changes to their PLC. Typically, they're only going to do it if your PLC goes up, not if it goes down. So it's really important to make sure and look for that language. And then also, by taking it on a pass-through basis, you also avoid any imputed risk premiums associated with the fact that, hey, even we think you're going to use 50,000 megawatt hours. We know it's $50,000 a year, but because we don't really know how much you're going to use, there's going to be some level of risk premium that's embedded as well.
Very, very true. We have one other question I was going to try to address. Can you address the difference in performance and cost of battery storage versus generation ran on natural gas? And all I'm going to be able to say there is, first, I think the assumption, or I'm going with the assumption that it's a local natural gas generator to help with resiliency at the actual location and not a dual combined cycle that Siemens may have built or Con Ed or someone else has. So with that assumption, I would say that just yesterday or the day before, I had read an article where Minnesota has already established that storage with solar is cheaper than what we call brown power. With that, the only thing that I can add is natural gas. You can potentially, and diesel or whatever. We've looked at that too for some of our customers, managing that on site for them. You run into some of the PURPA compliance, carbon emissions compliance, some of that stuff whenever you use natural gas, diesel, some of these other fuels, as opposed to you don't have that whenever you combine solar with your battery. I'm sorry, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's about the extent of my ability to answer it.
Yeah, and I think, again, work with your salesperson. We actually have a designated person within our organization that coordinates with all of our sister companies and all of our internal business development groups. And so if you want to look specifically at opportunities for one of your facilities, they can do an analysis for you.
Yeah.
So I think that's all the time that we have. We're actually about 5 minutes over. I want to thank everybody for your time today. If you have any questions, you have our contact information. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and we'll make sure to get these slides sent out as well. Thank you very much.
And thanks to all our participants for joining us today. We hope you found this webcast presentation informative. This concludes our webcast, and you may now disconnect. Have a wonderful day.